What's going on, everybody? Welcome back into the Fantasy Football Fellas YouTube channel. My name is Lucas Wenzel, and today we are breaking down 8 must-start players in Week 2 of Fantasy Football. We're going to be breaking down 2 players at each position, quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, and why they should be in your starting lineups this week. If you have start-sit questions that you want answered, drop them down in the comments below. Help each other out. We want to be a community that's there for each other and wants to see each other thrive in fantasy football. So help somebody out down in the comments below. If you want one of us fellas to answer your start-sit question, you can join our Chalkboard. We have a better chance of seeing it there, answering you directly. Or one of us will be live on Sunday before kickoff. So make sure you subscribe, turn on those notifications so you can be alerted when we go live, and we will be answering all of your start-sit questions ahead of kickoff. Without further ado, though, let's dive into these must-start players for Week 2 of Fantasy Football. We'll start the quarterback position. We're going to go with Anthony Richardson. It's our first start of the week at Houston this week. Now, I admittedly, coming into the season, I was skeptical on Anthony Richardson, right? I wasn't convinced he could get it done with his arm, and I thought he'd actually be more of a project for Shane Steichen than the likes of Justin Herbert and Jalen Hurts, were. But Anthony Richardson fared pretty well in Week 1, 24-37 for 233 and 1, added 40 rushing yards on the ground and a score as well. That's not a bad start. That was good for 21 fantasy points, a quarterback 4 overall last week. I think that's better than a lot of us were expecting him to do right off the bat. So now, going into Week 2, he draws a pretty good matchup with the Texans this week. And now I'd be remiss to say that Lamar Jackson did only score 7.5 points Week 1. But I think that was honestly a lot more to do with him in his first game in Todd Monken's system than it was like the Houston Texans defense at large. I think that has a lot more to do with the Ravens than it does the Texans. So really what we're honestly hoping for here, though, is that Richardson, he runs for more than 4 yards a carry. I'll take all the rushing attempts in the world. I'll take those 10 rushing attempts. But what would really be nice is that if we could see those rushing yards per attempt get up to 6-7 yards an attempt, find pay dirt on the ground again as well. I don't think they're going to have trouble moving the ball against the Texans. They didn't seem to against the Jaguars last week, so I think this should be a good game for Anthony Richardson to build on a solid Week 1 performance. We get those rushing yards up, get that efficiency up a little bit, find some pay dirt on the ground. He's currently my running back 8 going into this week. He's our consensus running back 8, and he should be finding your starting lineups in most leagues this week. Let's move on to our second quarterback, Jared Goff, against Seattle at home this week. Now, I already know people are going to look back at Week 4 last year and say, could we get another combined point total of 93 points? 48-45 was the final score of that game last year between these two teams. I think it's fool's gold for us to expect that, but that being said, I do think we see a good amount of points scored this week, and I'm feeling pretty good about starting Jared Goff. There's a multitude of reasons why I do like Goff this week. Number one, Matt Stafford, he just kept walking the Seattle defense down. Now, only 14 fantasy points. Kyron Williams, Cam Akers scored the bulk of the Rams' touchdowns, but he kept walking them down last week, 334 yards passing. And he did that with Puka Nacua and Tutu Atwell as his top 2 wide receivers. No disrespect to those two boys. Though they played nice. They were nice last week, but they combined for nearly 250 yards. And Matt Stafford was just slinging it around the yard. Imagine what Jared Goff is going to do with Amon-Ra, Sam Laporta, Josh Reynolds this week. And Jared Goff, last year we look at his home road splits. He was a home game merchant last year. In 9 games at home, Jared Goff was averaging 21.7 fantasy points per game. So if we're getting Goff in a home game with the over-under set at 47 total points against a defense that got picked apart by Matt Stafford in Week 1, sign me up. I'm 100% interested in Jared Goff this week. He could easily crack the top 12 quarterbacks this week. I believe he falls in as my quarterback 14. You'll see that in the graphic below. But I think Jared Goff has top 12 upside this week. Would not surprise me if he goes for 20+ against the Seahawks again this year. Last year he went for 34, so I think that's totally within his range of outcomes in Week 2. He could crack your starting lineup this week. Let's move on to running backs. We'll talk about 2 running backs next. This is going to be the segment of James First running back, James Cook. Oh, I slowly but surely am beginning to come out of the shadows from my love with James Cook. If you listen to the Fantasy Football Fellas podcast at all, I started proclaiming my love for him there. But now I'm sold. I am all in on James Cook this year. He's 100% a start for me in week 2. Week 1, it confirmed everything that we had been hearing this offseason, right? The backfield is James Cook's. This is his backfield. He's the guy. A 59% snap share in week 1. Now, that's not astronomical, but then you look at both Latavius Murray and Damian Harris. 23% snap share for Latavius Murray, 13% for Damian Harris. He doubled them up. Okay, that's a great sign. That is a great sign that this backfield is James Cook's. Now, it might not be the goal line opportunities, but you look at this matchup with the Raiders this week. Vegas, they allowed Denver running backs a total 10 receptions on 12 targets in week 1. We saw against the Jets last week. Let me rewind even a little bit. The Jets, it was no surprise that James Cook was going to struggle against the Jets. He still scored 10 fantasy points, but he still got 16 touches, including 4 receptions on 6 targets, right? So that's going to be the difference maker is receptions for James Cook in fantasy. And again, Vegas to Denver last week gave up 10 receptions on 12 targets. And now Buffalo, also a 9-point favorite in this game, assuming they're going to be playing ahead a ton. James Cook is going to get plenty of run here. It might not be goal line opportunities, but we saw those 16 touches in week 1. He might get 20 touches in week 2. If you just add 4 more rushing attempts, if he goes 16-4, that's 20 touches right there. That could be a really solid day for James Cook. So icing on the cake, Vegas, they've allowed the 5th most PPR points to running back since last season. Fire up Jimothy Cook this week. Jimothy Cook is my new nickname for James Cook. I know his name isn't Jim, but James Jimothy Cook. That's my new nickname for him. Fire him up this week. He's currently my running back 20. I honestly think he has top 15 upside. If he finds the end zone, catches enough passes this week, if he catches more than 4 passes, say he goes for 16-6, right? That's 22 touches. If he's averaging right around we'll say 0.75 fantasy points per touch. That's a really solid week for James Cook. So I'm willing to throw him in my starting lineups as my running back 2 this week. Next running back, we said it was the segment of James Conner now. He's at the Giants, or he plays at home against the Giants this week, excuse me. Now, it should be no surprise. You've been following the Fantasy Football Fellas for a while. If you're a regular here, you know it's my flag plant, James Conner. I love my boy James Conner this year. And I know how many of you hate the Cardinals offense. You think I'm dumb. The Cardinals offense, they're just going to be really bad this year. They're not going to be able to move the football. Not going to score touchdowns. I mean, you're right, but his week 1 performance was decently inspiring. He had 19 total touches, catching 5 of 5 targets, only totaled 8 yards, but I don't think that'll repeat itself. I think we'll actually get some yardage on top of that. But that's free. That's a free 5 points right there from James Conner that he's going to give you in the passing game. He averaged 4.4 yards per carry behind this extremely mid offensive line. I can't even say mid. They're worse than mid. This is not a good offensive line. 4.4 yards per carry, and he played 84% of the team's snaps. Now, that's great. That is great because he is the clear workhorse in Arizona. Keontae Ingram, Corey Clement, nothing out of them. They're not chipping into James Conner's role here. So you're getting a guy who's probably going to get somewhere close to 20 touches almost every single week. And now I do think the Giants will fare better in week 2 than they did in week 1. Obviously, they got absolutely stomped by the Dallas Cowboys, but they also gave up 3 rushing touchdowns to the Dallas Cowboys. So again, James Conner could have a similar week to last, find pay dirt, and he's at 17, 18 fantasy points all of a sudden, and he's a top 12 running back on the week. So I'd feel good about starting him, especially with the role that he's going to continue seeing in this offense. It's not going to be pretty. You're not going to want to turn on the Cardinals game to see how James Conner is doing. You're just going to want to sit and watch the box score at the end of the week because James Conner could give you 15 plus this week. He is currently my running back 13 on the week. Let's transition over to wide receivers. Mike Williams against the Tennessee Titans this week. You got to put him in your lineup. And I'm honestly probably going to be picking on this Titan secondary like all season long because they could go back-to-back years of allowing the most fantasy points per game to wide receivers. I would not put it past them. When the only change they made was bringing in Sean Murphy-Bunting, who, yes, had a nice year in Tampa. I think that's probably more scheme why he had a great year than in Tennessee now where they were already a bad secondary. I don't think Sean Murphy-Bunting, boosts that secondary to like this new astronomical level where they become good all of a sudden. Last week against the Saints, they allowed 49 fantasy points to wide receivers. Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed both went for 19 plus. And if Derek Carr can go for 305, what do you think Herbert is going to do? What do you think Kellen Moore is going to do here? Throw it all around the yard. Piece apart this secondary. Let your MVP candidate quarterback, I know we're really early in the season, but like Justin Herbert has decent MVP odds. Let your guy who could be an NFL MVP chuck it around the yard. Especially if you don't have Austin Eckler this week. We'll see if he's in or out by the time this video comes out, but if Eckler misses, oh boy, they're going to be chucking the ball around the yard. Excuse me. Obviously, frustrating outing from Mike Williams last week. Well, we got to focus on that a little bit too. 4 for 45 on 5 targets. He did leave the game briefly, go get checked for a concussion. But this is just too good of a matchup to leave Mike on your bench, all right? We could be looking at one of those big 20-point bombs from Mike this week, right? One of those 100-yard games, 6 receptions and a score, right? Give you 22 points, and if you don't start him, that's sitting on your bench. You're like, why didn't I start Mike? Because you don't want to trust Mike Williams. But this week you should, because it's too good of a matchup against the Titans. Like I said, if Austin Eckler is out, Keenan Allen and Mike Williams all of a sudden become the top 2 options here for Justin Herbert in this Kellen Moore offense. So Mike should, at the very least, find your flex spot, and he's currently our consensus wide receiver 21 for week 2. So absolutely, I think Mike should be finding your starting lineup this week. It's just too juicy of a matchup against the Titans. Keenan Allen's going to have a big week. You can expect a big week for Mike Williams as well. All right, I think I got the tickle out of my throat. I was debating if I needed to step away and take an awkward cut, but we're going to keep going. Brandon Aiyuk at the Los Angeles Rams. He is my second start of the week. I shouldn't really have to explain a lot here, obviously. Coming off a massive 33-point explosion in week 1. This Rams secondary, just incredibly uninspiring. I mean, I know they did good work against Seattle last week, but like, I'm sorry. If you didn't tune into the Fantasy Football Fellas podcast for a week 1 preview where Tyler read off the Rams secondary, I'm going to read you all of the Rams cornerbacks here. And I want you to figure out if any of them are a threat or if you've even ever heard of any of them. All right, you ready? Kobe Durant, Darion Kendrick, Akella Witherspoon, Duke Shelley, Trey Tomlinson. Those are all of the rostered Rams cornerbacks right now. How many of those guys are prevalent threats? I'll tell you Duke Shelley isn't. He was a Minnesota Viking last year. I despised Duke Shelley. He was terrible to watch last year. Much better football player than me, don't get me wrong, but like none of these guys are prevalent threats to the wideouts. And in games where Brandon Aiyuk has seen 6+ targets against the Rams in his career, he's gone for at least 81 receiving yards and has seen at least 16 fantasy points in each of those games. This 49ers offense, running like a machine right now. Like, it's going to be incredibly hard for any team in the NFL to step up and slow down what Kyle Shanahan has put together here. So, all that being said, if Aiyuk is truly the number 1 wide receiver in San Francisco, like we all expect him to be, we can expect to see another 6+ target game for him against the Rams, and I think he'll capitalize on this weak Rams secondary. Brandon Aiyuk absolutely should be in all your lineups this week. He could go for 20+ again this week, and we're talking about next week, is Brandon Aiyuk a top 10 wide receiver the rest of the season in fantasy football? Now, that's a different conversation. We won't jump the gun, but Brandon Aiyuk should find your lineup for the time being. All right, last position here. Let's move on to tight ends. Cole Kmet. All right, we're going to get a little nasty here with these tight ends, all right? Mostly because you don't need to hear me tell you, oh, start George Kittle this week. Oh, start Evan Ingram this week. Like, these are guys that automatically were finding your lineup. So I want to give you guys who might be on your waiver wire, who deeper down, like, I'm desperate. I need somebody here. Cole Kmet might not actually be on your waiver wire, but his numbers just blew me away last week when I went back and actually looked at them. 7 targets, tied for the most with Darnell Mooney last week on the Chicago Bears. 97% of the snaps he played. That's an insanely high number. Like, Cole Kmet was on the field all the time last week. He was a tight end 6 with only scored 9.4 fantasy points, but he was a tight end 6 last week, okay? In Tampa Bay's defense, you look at the matchup at Tampa Bay this week, they just got handled by TJ Hawkinson in week 1. 8 receptions they gave up to Hawkinson, allowed 18 total fantasy points to the position last year, 11 total receptions, another 30-plus yards to Josh Oliver as well. So 18 fantasy points given up on the week to the Minnesota Vikings tight ends. And so if Justin Fields is going to be the mayor of check down city for the second straight week, my gosh, that was frustrating to go back and watch last week. Like, if he's going to be check down city again, like, Cole Kmet's going to benefit massively here. You get any underneath crossing routes, Cole Kmet, he could rack up 6, 7, 8 receptions this week. So he's by far my favorite play of the week if you're struggling at tight end. If he's floating around on your waivers, I believe on Sleeper I looked, he was rostered in like 75% of leagues. Like, that's not, obviously he's probably not going to be floating on your waiver wire there, but on the off chance he hit your waiver wire and he's still there, I would go ahead and pick up Cole Kmet. I like the matchup with Tampa Bay this week, especially if you're desperate at the tight end position. He's just going to be a volume play. Second tight end I love this week, Luke Musgrave. The Green Bay Packers, they're at the Atlanta Falcons this week. And now, I have never, ever fallen victim to the rookie tight end trap. I never have. I am very outspoken that I am against rookie tight ends year 1. I don't want to touch them, but dang it, man. There's something about Luke Musgrave this week that I just can't shake. I can't shake it. I'm feeling good about Luke Musgrave this week, all right? Christian Watson, he's still dealing with a hamstring injury, all right? And I don't know exactly where this data is pulled from, but Jason Moore on the Fantasy Footballers podcast said that wide receivers who are struggling with hamstring injuries, well, I shouldn't just exclusively say wide receivers, players who are struggling with hamstring injuries that miss practice on Wednesday are 53% likely to miss the upcoming week of action. And Christian Watson, yeah, he was a DNP on Wednesday. I haven't gone back and checked Thursday's practice reports, but I do believe he was limited at the very, very best. So Christian Watson may be out this week. And once again, the Packers will be without Christian Watson, as I just said, Christian Watson less. And the main guys will be who? Romeo Doubs and Luke Musgrave. Especially if you get Aaron Jones. If Aaron Jones is still struggling with his hamstring injury as well, all of a sudden, it's Romeo Doubs and Luke Musgrave as Jordan Love's top 2 options. So you look at Musgrave's advanced metrics even. My gosh, they were encouraging. 72 air yards in week 1. 72 air yards. I almost said 87. He wasn't quite that good. 72 air yards in week 1. That led all tight ends in the NFL. And his average depth of target, 18 yards. Are you kidding me? He should have had a touchdown too. That's not an advanced metric, but he should have had a touchdown last week. He should have found pay dirt. He really would have paid off for you last week. So now he gets a plus matchup with Atlanta where I don't want to solely use the Carolina Panthers last week because Bryce Young was like, all he wanted to do was target tight ends. He took 0 risks. It was all Terrace Marshall and Hayden Hurst, easy completions. But he did have 6 receptions and a score. You look back to last season, then 2, Atlanta allowed 14 fantasy points per game to tight ends. That was the 5th most. 4th most. Top 5 most last year. I don't think that's going to be changing anytime soon this year. So I'm like, oh man, I'm sneaky in love with Luke Musgrave. And if you're in a league where Cole Kmet isn't accessible to you, probably isn't on waivers like I said. But if Cole Kmet isn't available, Luke Musgrave is my next go-to guy. I am absolutely in love with him this week. I think he could be a smash start. He could even be a low-end starter option in some leagues. Alrighty, that is all I have for you today. Thanks again for tuning into the Fantasy Football Fellas YouTube channel. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, make sure you do that. Turn on those notifications. Again, we're going to be going live on Sunday before the games. If you want your start sit questions answered by one of us fellas, one of us will be live before kickoff on Sunday where you can come. We will answer all of your start sit questions. But remember, turn on those notifications so you can be alerted when we actually do go live Sunday morning. Thanks again for tuning in. We will see you all next week. We'll be talking more waivers. We'll be talking more buy low, sell highs. I'll be back with starts next week. We're on our regular schedule now, so we will see you all next week. Thanks for tuning in. Deuces.